Hi, you guys. So we are going to go ahead and we're going to review some topics about energy flow in the ecosystem as well as group behavior. And this is to go ahead and to kind of prepare you guys for your quiz. So first and foremost, kind of going over some of the guiding questions for our chapter. So number one, why do some populations grow, decline, or remain stable? So as you guys remember, there are a couple of different types of growth in this case, right? There is exponential, in which we go ahead and we keep on growing forever and ever, and your graph kind of looks like this, and the population just shoots up like a J, right? And then you guys go ahead and you have your logistic graph. And that graph is going to go ahead and it grows exponentially, and then it levels out. And where it levels out, that is our carrying capacity, right? So those are our things on there, right? So some populations go ahead and they grow, right, because they have enough resources. And it really does come down to resources. If you do not have enough resources, your population is not going to grow, plain and simple, right? You decline because there is basically not enough resources. So if there's not enough food, if there's not enough water, if there's not enough space, right, if there's not enough mates, any of that stuff kind of go ahead and it causes a population to decline. If we are stable, it means that we have reached carrying capacity, right? So we reach carrying capacity. And because we reach carrying capacity, we are going ahead and we are stable with our environment, right? So we are stable with environment, right? So that goes ahead and that causes the population to kind of level out, right? So that is our first thing. Next thing, we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about how energy is transferred between species in a community, right? So this kind of leads us into our trophic pyramid, right? So we have our pyramid that looks some deal like that, right? And we got 3 levels going on. We have our producers at the bottom, and producers, they make their own food. They make food. So they make food, pretty much the producers make food for everybody in the ecosystem, right? Then we go ahead and we have our consumers, right? So we have pretty much our primary consumers. Consumers. And our primary consumers, they go ahead and there are herbivores. And they eat producers only. Right, and then next thing is going to be like our secondary and tertiary consumers, right? And these guys are our predators, right? Our predator that it's going to be at the top is going to be our apex predator, and they are the ones that are like at the top of the food chain. So what happens is that the producers, they make all the food, right? So the producers go ahead and they make tons and tons of energy, and they make food using the sun. So they go ahead and they make food using the sun. And what happens is that 90% of that energy that they are going ahead and that they are making, right, 90% is for themselves. And that goes for every level. At every level, 90% is for the animal at that level, for animal or plant. At that level, right? And then 10% gets passed down. Right? So 10% gets passed. So only 10% of the energy that is formed gets passed down. So that goes ahead and that comes into our rule of 10%. Right? So those are things that we see on there. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to go to advantages and disadvantages of social and solitary behavior, right? So animal behavior advantages. And there are a few that we are going to go ahead and we're going to go through. So first of all, we're going to go ahead and we're going to define social, and solitary. So pretty much social, this is going to be our groups, right? And solitary, it means that you're flying solo, right? Which means by themselves. So those are our two things, right? So there's some advantages and there's some disadvantages, right? If you are social, your huge advantage is that you have to share. As much as it is a disadvantage, right? The whole thing about sharing, it kind of goes both ways, right? So in groups, the big thing is that you share, right? You share both the good and the bad, right? So the good things that you share is like food. You can share water. If somebody finds food, like you can also eat that as well, right? But the thing that comes with sharing is that you also share the not so good things, right? So in a social situation, you share diseases easily, right? It's because diseases get passed down from animal to animal. So you also are not sharing. That's not a good thing to share. Also, when there's a shortage, right? Shortage of a resource, right? That shortage of the resource is going to go ahead and that's going to backfire onto everybody into that community, right? So they're going to go ahead and they are not going to go ahead and not have enough. The other good thing about sharing is that you guys can also like take turns in like a social situation, right? So you can have divided jobs, right? And that goes for protection is the big one, right? So being in a group ultimately provides you protection because you have, like a bunch of extra eyes around your back. So that really helps in going ahead and being in a social situation. If you are by yourself, right? The big thing is that you have to do everything yourself. So you are self-reliant. Reliant. So that means that you are /responsible, right? So you are responsible for everything. So if you don't find food, you don't have food. If you have food and you found food, then you have lots of food, right? So that is the thing is that you are responsible for yourself, right? So you have to find own resources. You have to make sure that you have enough for you, right? The good thing is that there's less to provide for. Like you ultimately need less. But the bad thing is that if you cannot hunt for some other reason because that animal's hurt and it can't hunt by itself and can't catch anything, right? Because you're not in a group or a pack in which a group or a pack will help you go ahead and find stuff, right? A solo animal is more likely to die in that situation. Also, you're also kind of like thinking that a solo animal can be advantageous if you are like a bigger animal. Like if you're a bigger animal and you need to eat a lot, right, then you don't really want to go ahead and don't really want to be with a bunch of other big animals that need to eat a lot because then you guys are ultimately sharing, right, what little you guys have. Okay, so those are our things on there. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on into the food web, and we're going to look at this food web for a little bit. Mine is very fuzzy, but, we will get through it. Okay, so on this food web, we have to go ahead and we're going to start by doing our trophic levels, right? So our trophic levels here is we have our producers, which are our plants, right? And again, they make their own food. We have our primary consumers. And these are the animals that are our herbivores. And if you guys ever forget what that means, herbivores. Right? If you guys ever forget what that means, herb is a plant, right? So that means that they eat plants. So that's kind of one way to kind of remember that. Then we have our secondary consumers. Oopsies. Consumers. These can go either way. These are either omnivores our herb. Okay, guys, so as I was saying, we have our trophic levels here, and we're looking at our food web, and we're going ahead and we're starting to label some of our trophic levels. So our plants are obviously going to be our producers. These guys that eat the plant are herbivores, and they are our primary consumers because they are the first ones that we have on there. The next one is our secondary consumers, and they can go either way. They can be omnivores or carnivores. And you guys see on there carne, right, which is meat, right, and omnivores, which is going ahead and eating both, right? So omnivores is both, right, and carnivores is meat, right? And those are our secondary consumers. And then up here towards the top, this is our tertiary consumers. And they go ahead, and these are usually some of our top predators are in this category. These ones are strictly carnivores, right? And they're the ones that go ahead and they eat meat. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about our energy and how much energy is at each level. So like I mentioned a little bit earlier, our producers are the ones with the most energy, right? So looking at these numbers on here, we have our highest number is 600,000, right? And they have joules. Joules is just a unit of energy that we use in science, right? Now, since in each trophic level, right, only 10% of the energy is passed on. And then again, that is our rule of 10%. So what happens is that 90% of the energy that these plants produce, so 90% of this number right here, it gets used for living, right? So 90% is used for living, right? 10% is passed on, and that goes for every level. So an easy way to go ahead and to figure out how much is 10%, right? You guys just go ahead and you smack off 1 0. So you guys will see on here that I dropped a 0, right? And then that is how many joules is on there, right? Same deal on here, right? I go ahead and I write this number, and I drop a 0, and I get 6,000. And then I go ahead and I drop a 0, and I get 600. And again, for each level, right, 90% is used for living, 10% can be passed. So over time, right, there's just less energy available as you guys go up the food chain. That doesn't mean that the food isn't nutritious or anything. It just means that there is by far less energy that is there. Okay, so that is our thing on there. I already went over these things. So herbivore, again, eats plants, like plant eater, right? Omnivore is both plants and animals. Plants plus animals. And then our next thing is we have carnivores, which is meat. Right? So we have our meat eaters. So we have our meat eaters on there. And then our rule of 10% is only 10% of energy gets passed from level to level. Level to level. Okay? So those is our quick little vocab. Okay. So the next thing is to go ahead and to use the following food web to go ahead and to answer a few of these questions for us. Okay. So looking at this food web, right, we have to go ahead and before we kind of get into this food web, what I want to do is I want you guys to make sure that you know the different parts of the food web so that we are clear on all of those things on there. So with this, right, we are looking at our animals, and we see that we have numbers attached to them, right? And they're going ahead and they're asking, the numbers is how much energy each of those things have. Then we go ahead and we look at all of the arrows that we have going on here, right? And there's just a bunch of arrows. The thing that I want you guys to know about these arrows and to notice is that if you guys are looking at this, right, the fungi has an arrow pointing to the deer, right? So we have this fungi that's pointing an arrow to the deer. If this arrow is pointing to the deer, the arrow means that energy is being passed. Arrow is energy flow, right? And the arrow's energy flow, it does not mean that, oh, like the fungi is eating the deer, right? Because that doesn't make any sense, right? So the arrow, you guys have to make sure that the arrow you guys know is the energy flowing. So this arrow means that the energy is flowing from the berries to the bunny, right? Same deal as a food chain, right? So a food chain, right? In this case, we have berries, right? They go ahead and go to the bunny, right? And from the bunny, it goes to the coyote. And then from the coyote, we go to the wolf, right? And that is how energy is being passed on there, right? So again, right, this is energy flow. So that is how the energy is moving through the ecosystem. So what you have to think about is this food web is just a bunch of different food chains that are combined together, right? And we're just putting them all on the same page, right? So again, now they're going ahead and asking us how much energy do all the producers have, right? So what I go ahead and I do is I find my producers. My producers are typically going to be at the bottom. And right here are all my producers, my grass, my berries, and my fungi, right? And now I have to figure out how much energy they have. So in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add. So I go ahead and I add 500,000 plus 60,000 plus 70,000, right? And if I go ahead and if I add all of those numbers together, right, I am going to have, let me double check that real quick. 6 plus, so plus, right, so I have 6 joules, right? And that is, I get this number by going ahead and adding it, right? So I want to make sure that I'm adding all of those guys. Okay, the next thing is which animal is your apex predator? So I'm looking at my food chain and now I have to figure out where is all of the energy going, right? So I'm looking for the one that has all of the energy going towards it. So I go ahead and I'm looking at this. I see the energy from the rat, the sheep, the deer, the coyote, the falcon, the hawk, right? All of this energy is going towards the red wolf, right? So if I'm going ahead and I'm looking at where the energy is going towards, energy is here, right? So all the energy is right here, which means that this wolf is our apex predator, right? So our wolf is our apex, right? And that is because all the energy is going towards that wolf, right? All right. Secondary consumers. So my secondary consumers, you guys can also think about secondary consumers as the people who are second to the plant, who get to the plant second, okay? So I'm going ahead and I'm looking through here, right? And I'm looking through here, and these guys right here, my rat, my sheep, my deer, and my bunny, they all eat plants. So they are all primary consumers. Now I go ahead and I'm looking at that. So what is the next level up, right? So I have a couple of secondary consumers here. Right, so I'm looking here and I'm looking at where my energy from these guys are going to. So if I look here, right, I have an arrow here, I have an arrow that goes here, and then I have arrows that go to my wolf, right? My wolf, although he is an apex predator, right, he also kind of eats from a couple of different places, right? So we can say that I have 2 types of secondary consumers. I have my wolf, who's my secondary consumer, and I have my coyote, who's my secondary consumer. Let me just double check that. Coyote, who's also my secondary consumer. Next thing are my herbivores. My herbivores are AKA my primary consumers, right? So looking at that, right, I have a few on there. So I have my rat, my deer, my sheep, and my bunny. And those are all herbivores. Next thing are my carnivores, right? So I look at everybody who's eating meat, right? So I would have my coyote, my red wolf, my hawk, and my falcon, right? No, just my red wolf and my coyote. Yeah, just my red wolf and coyote. Red wolf / coyote. My hawk and my falcon are not on there. Okay, and then okay, so then just quickly reviewing, right, we're looking at omnivores on here. So we're looking for things that eat both, right? So if we're looking at our animals that we have on here, right, we're looking for animals that can eat from the bottom, which is down here, as well as go ahead and eat some meat-eating things, right? So in looking at a few of those arrows, we have berries. You guys are going ahead and you guys are kind of looking around here, and you guys will see that we don't really have any animals that go ahead and that eat both plants and animals, right? So what it would look like if we went ahead and we had something was that, say if we had a hawk or a falcon, right, and say if my hawk per se for some reason ate berries, right, and then my hawk also ate bunnies, right? So if my hawk is eating both bunnies and berries, right, then he would be an omnivore, right? Because omnivores go ahead and they eat both, right? They eat both plants and animals. So that is what you would be looking on there. In this case, we have none, right? But in other cases, what it would look like is that you would have two arrows that are kind of pointing on there. So those are the things that you are going ahead and looking for. Okay, so real quickly, right? You guys are going to have to be able to build your own food web, right? So you guys have to basically build a food web from scratch. And to be able to go ahead and to be able to do that, you have to know pretty much what is kind of happening on here. So we are going to go ahead and I'm going to make a separate one right here on the side. And then we will kind of go ahead and we'll start it off from there. So we have our grass. And we have our grass, and now we have to go ahead and we have to look on here, and we have to determine what is happening. So our grass is eaten by the rabbit because the rabbit eats plants, right? Our grass is also eaten by moths, right? So we have that on there, right? Then the next thing is that our moth, some of the energy from our moth is transferred to our robins. Right, and then looking at our robins, it also eats grasses as well, right? So you can see that the robins also eats moss and grasses, so that's two sources of energy for it, right? Next, we have our eagle. Our eagle eats other birds and rabbits. So our eagle is getting energy from robins, and our eagle is getting energy from rabbits. Right, and then we have our mountain lions, right, and it eats birds of prey, which is our eagle, and it also eats rabbits. So you guys can see here that when you guys are looking on this, this is our producers, is our primary consumers. This one can function as a secondary consumer, right? This one can either be tertiary or secondary, and this one is definitely like tertiary or quaternary, right? But our mountain lions function as our top predator. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a moment and we're going to look at our social behavior stuff once again, just to make sure that you guys completely understand what some of the social behavior stuff means, okay? So, again, social behavior means that you guys are going ahead and you live in a group, right? So this is a group living sort of deal. So group living. So you guys have to think like penguins, you guys got to think like zebras, right? All of those things, all those animals that live in big, big groups, that's what you guys got to think. Okay, so benefits, right? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about benefits. So benefits is that you guys do get to share. You share food. You share resources. You share protection. And you also are able to go ahead and you're able to help each other out, basically. right? So those are the big like advantages, like help as in hunting, right? So you get hunting help, you get help raising young, all of those things, right? Help when you're hurt, right? Help when you're sick, right? All of those things are good things to have, right? The bad things about social behavior is that when stuff is not going well, you still have to share, right? So you have to share even when low on resources, right? So you share even though you are low on resources, and that's the thing with going ahead and doing those things is that like even when you are low on resources, you do have to make sure that you guys are sharing whatever you have, right? So whatever you have gets going ahead and that gets shared among like the people that you are with or the animals that you are with, right? You have to go ahead and you have to share. So, like you found a little piece, right? So now everybody's going to go ahead and we're going to divvy up that little piece. And that's just how the sharing go ahead and works, right? For solitary behavior, this is living solo. So if you are living by yourself, there are some advantages to going ahead and to live by yourself, right? So when you live solo, there are a couple of things. Number one, right, only one animal that needs resources, right? So since you are the only animal that absolutely needs the resources, right, you have to look out for your own space, your own food, and all of that, right? So you have to be able to go ahead and you guys have to be able to like find those different things. And that's one of the advantages. So when resources are low and if you're a good hunter and you're able to find it, right, that is going to benefit you a lot. The bad thing is that in solitary behavior, right, if you are not able to go ahead, if you're not able to find something, right, you basically have to suffer the consequences of it, right? So you are still responsible. So you're still responsible for yourself. Which means that you need to make sure that you got your own food / resources. Right, so that's the huge thing, is to be able to find your own food / resources. You have no protection, right? So you have no protection from predators. So that is kind of like a big thing on there. So that's why you see that a lot of solitary behavior happens a little bit towards the top of the food chain. Because as you get towards the top of the food chain, right, those big animals, they need more space. They need to go ahead and to have more resources to themselves and all of that. So those are like the big things that you guys have, is that there is like no protection. You got to find your own stuff. You got to be able to go ahead and to be able to do your own thing, right? But your advantages is that there is only one of you that you have to take care of. You don't have to worry about taking care of the whole group, or if something or somebody gets sick or anything like that, right? Those are the big things on there, right? Because you're likely not going to come into contact with another animal of your species. And then just one last thing I forgot to put on here is that you also have to share the bad thing of diseases, right? Because diseases through a population is going to pass very, very quickly. So that is kind of like one of the disadvantages. So if there's like some sort of breakout of some sort of illness, right, that will go ahead and that will be a disadvantage to the group. Okay, you guys. So thank you for listening and good luck on your quiz. And I will see you guys next time.